Hi all, this is the MakeHaven video for the planer. The planer is a tool that's used for dressing wood and for dimensioning it. You can also sometimes use it for finishing. So in principle, there's this metal bed that the wood rests on, and then there are two rollers on the inside, two rubber rollers that are pulling the wood through, and then in the middle is a head with blades on it. And those blades are spinning in the other direction, cutting off the top of the wood. So the things you can use it for are taking wood that is still rough from the lumberyard, so it has all the lines on it from the big saws and aging and whatnot. And then you can pass it through. If the wood is relatively flat, you can pass it through just to clean it. The things that the planer can take care of in terms of distortions in the wood are cups, is cupping. So if the wood has a curvature along the length, then it can take care of that. We'll get to that more later. So in general, the wood is going to come off the jointer, so you will have dressed one side of it. So one side will be flat, and that flat side is going to go down. You're going to pass it through, and it's going to clean the other sides. Then you'll have two parallel sides, two sides that are parallel to each other. Then you'll have jointed one edge, and you can rip the other edge. So then you'll have S4S wood, which means square on four sides. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look at the various pieces on here from left to right to figure out how we're going to use this tool. So on the leftmost side is a depth stop. So often you're taking off a very small amount of wood per pass in this tool, so it gets a little repetitious and you may forget exactly how deep you are, so you can use this to prevent you from going too deep. If you decide that you want to make sure you don't go any deeper than a ½ inch, you can turn it to a ½ inch and that's where it'll stop, to prevent you from going deeper. As you're going through, in all likelihood, you'll be using calipers or another piece of wood to see exactly how thick you want it to be. But this is just to stop you from going too deep. So over from that is the speed controller. So one on the left is for finishing, and what that means is the rollers are moving pretty slowly. So it's pulling the wood through and giving the blades a lot of time to leave a really nice finish on the top of your wood. If you were to switch it over to 2, which as it says you can only do when the motor is running, that just makes the rollers move a lot faster, which means it can take off more wood more quickly. In general, it moves about quickly enough on 1, and any faster than that, and it gets a little bit tricky to keep control. So in general, we just leave it on 1. Next over from that is the gauge that indicates how much wood is going to be removed. So when you put your piece of wood in, it hits a little metal bar in here, and this little red arrow comes up to show how much wood is going to be taken off by the blades approximately. And that's just at the leading tip, so if there's any variations in the wood, it'll be different along the length. What this is trying to indicate is if you had, say, a 3-inch wide piece of wood, you could take off up to an 1/8 inch thick of wood. And then 13 inches wide, or the full bed width, you would only want to take off a maximum of a 32nd of wood. I think realistically, an 1/8 of an inch is a whole lot to take off at once, and you're generally going to take quarter turns, which is about a 64th of an inch, so we'll get to that in a minute. But this is a good indication in general, and especially when you're taking your first pass and you want to make sure that the piece of wood is not taking off too much for that first go, you can put it in just to hear for that clicking sound. Next is the power switch, so you just pull to turn it on, push to turn it off. Over from that is the fuse. Sometimes if you push the wood too, if you push the motor too hard by taking off too much wood at a time, it'll pop the fuse. So you can just push that back in and then take off less wood. One note about the power switch is with this tool you're taking a lot of passes and you don't need to turn it off between each pass. You can just leave it on until you're done. This is the depth indicator, so it shows the absolute depth between the base and the blades. It's not super duper accurate, so you will want to be checking yourself to make sure that it's actually getting the thickness that you want, again, either with calipers or checking it next to the board you're joining it to. And the very last piece on the far right is the handle that controls the height. So as you turn this clockwise, it lowers the whole head down, and counterclockwise is going to raise it up. As you're going, I would recommend starting with just a quarter turn at a time. And I think that equates to about a 64th of an inch. So you're really taking off a pretty conservative amount of wood. But that's a good place to start. If you find that it's handling that with no problem whatsoever and you want to go a little quicker, you can try, but you're probably going to see some degradation of the finish quality. So the last thing I want to mention is that no metal whatsoever can go in this. So you need to make sure there are no staples, no nails. If you think that there might be, then probably don't put it in here. If you have no idea, you can use the metal detector up on the wall and pass it over it and just check to make sure that there's no metal. What happens if metal goes through is it chips the blades, and then the blades need to be switched around. One additional note before we get started is that when you are feeding wood in, the wood is going to go under the first roller, and then it's going to hit the blades, and sometimes what happens is the blades take out a deeper bite for those first 2-3 inches before it gets to the second roller, which pushes it back down. And then as it's going out the back end, the wood leaves the first roller, and again, the blades take a deeper bite before it comes out behind the second roller. To prevent against this, what's called snipe, what you can do is as the wood is going in, you lift up on the back end, and then once it's coming out the back, you lift up on that front end, and that will help fulcrum around those rollers to help minimize the amount of snipe you're going to get. However, sometimes the snipe is unavoidable, and what that means is that you want to pass through the longest piece of wood possible through the planer, because you're going to lose those 6 inches, 3 inches on either end. And it's far preferable to lose only 6 inches in total versus 6 inches off of each final piece of wood that's been cut down to length. So that's just sort of like a layout tip when it comes to figuring out the order of operations. So we're going to get started. We're going to grab this piece of oak that we already jointed one face to and one edge of. And now that we know that this is a flat surface, we're going to put it through the planer and clean off the other side. So the first step here is putting it on and raising up the head pretty generously. So what we want to do for the first pass, given that we don't know if there are any lumps or other things in the wood that may be higher than the first tip, we want to raise it so it's only just barely glancing the inside. So realistically, for the first pass, it's not actually going to hit anything. Then for subsequent passes, we can lower it down and start to bite into the wood. So this is a good height. It's not even moving the indicator, so that seems like a reasonable position. So now we're ready to get started. It's set on position 1. I'm just going to make sure that the gates on the other tools are closed. So table saw, both of the table saw gates, as well as the jointer and floor sweep are closed, and now the planer is open. This tool is fairly loud, though with the Helix blades, it's far less loud than it used to be. However, hearing protection is probably still a good idea. So on that first pass, it didn't bite into the wood at all, which is fine. You can see that the rollers were at a height where they could pull the wood through for a bit of it. Also, I moved the head down just a quarter turn, so for this next pass, it'll just be slightly lower. And I didn't need to really pull up on the front or the back because it didn't look like it was going to be biting into it. So we can take a second pass now.
It ended up taking more than 2 passes to clean up the wood on the planer, so I just went ahead and took the rest of the passes. So I'll take this opportunity to mention that when you're planing wood, it can be very helpful to wax the bed of the planer using the paste wax on the wall. To do that, you just take some paper towel and rub it into the wax and then buff it into the surface of the bed of the planer after you've raised the planer head all the way up, and then wipe off the excess with another paper towel, and that should help a lot when it comes to making the wood slide through smoothly.
So it took a bunch of passes, but we finally got down to the point where the rough patches have been removed. So there's some valleys that took a little longer to get to, but eventually we got down to the point where it was all flat. Some last notes are that, similar to with the jointer, if you are experiencing poor surface finish, something you can do is take note of the grain on the wood. The grain has run out where it comes out of the side of the piece of wood, and you want the blade to spin in such a way that it's going with those fibers. If it's going against it, it'll be pulling those up and leaving a poor finish. So in this case, where the blade is spinning like this is the appropriate direction to be feeding. However, sometimes you can flip it around and it won't be terribly consequential if your blades are really sharp. One other note is that sometimes when you get the wood, it has various types of warps in it. If it has a twist, the planer will generally not help with that. If it has a bow, as I mentioned, it generally won't help with that. But if the wood has a cup to it, where it is bent along this direction, then sometimes the planer can help with that. And the way you would do that is you would put it with the cup side down, so you'd have the 2 legs providing a stable surface on the planer base, and then the top of that cup would be flattened off. Then once that's flat, you can flip it over and take off those 2 legs of the cup with the planer. And in that way, sometimes you don't need to actually use the jointer for cleaning up the wood. However, if it has a twist or a bow to it, then you would still need to use the jointer. So those are just some notes for the planer. When you're done, as with all the other tools, make sure to grab a vacuum and just clean up any chips that weren't collected by the dust collector, and then you're good to go. Thanks for watching.